Welcome back to Dave Smith Unleashed. And once again, of course, thanks to all the subscribers and thanks for helping the show grow. And make sure you subscribe and you like and you follow and you comment and all that whenever you go on to Dave Smith Unleashed on YouTube. So, kind enough to hang in there and do a part 2 of this. My former partner, and you all remember the great Ben and Dave show, the legendary show from the late 90s on AM 1150. In part 1, we told all kinds of great stories. And here's part 2 now with Ben Maller. Ben, thanks for hanging in there with us.
No, Dave, it's great to be on with you, man. I love reminiscing. We should have done this years ago. I don't know why we waited. I think we're coming up. We're in 2025 as we're doing this right now. So we're only a few years away from, what are we looking at? Is that the 30th anniversary?
It would be like 98, like 27 years. I think it was 98 when we started.
98 we started. So, but I'm saying we're only a few years away from that's 30 years. That's wild.
That's amazing.
That is amazing. I mean, we should do some kind of anniversary show. And the great thing, Dave, all those young guys that listened to us when they were little kids, like 10, 12, 13 years old, they're all, as you said in the last podcast we did together, they're all in their 40s now, right? They've all got kids of their own that are all grown up and all that. It's the circle of life. And so many people, though, as I said to you on and off the podcast, Dave, so many people I've run into in my travels in the years since we did the Ben and Dave show loved that show. That was a big part of their childhood. And it was really, as we said, the last generation, the kids that listen to the Ben and Dave show. It's not like that. It's like I do an overnight show, and every once in a while during the summer at Fox Sports Radio, I'll have some kids call me up and I'll do some kid radio and stuff like that. Normally they're being dragged by their parents, like they're delivering the newspaper, their dad is or something like that. I had a little girl years ago, they called up with her dad, Maggie from Cleveland, and sweet little girl. And she'd call, go to hell, LeBron James and all this stuff. But the only way you get that now is because of the parent. It's very rare that a kid will just stumble on to a sports radio show. But back in 98, 99, in those years, you didn't have many opportunities to get sports information. The internet, when we were doing the Ben and Dave show, what was the internet? America Online was still around, Netscape Navigator. There was no social media in those days. There was chat rooms and things like that. So it was a whole different ball game back when we were doing the Ben and Dave show and all the nonsense that took place back in those days. And I remember some of the great moments we had with guests, Dave, on the Ben and Dave show. I remember one time we were doing a remote from a rental car place near LAX. Do you remember this show? We had a player, I think he was with the Pittsburgh Pirates at the time, named Derek Bell.
Yes.
Do you remember this?
Yes.
Do you remember this? Okay. So we had Derek Bell on. It was fine. He was a decent Major League Baseball player, but we had him on. We were shooting the breeze. And I remember he said, hold on a sec. He put the phone down, and then we could kind of make out in the background like a female voice or something like that, and he never picked the phone up again. He just forgot about us. Remember that? In the middle of the interview, he just put the phone down, walked away, and I don't know who the women were or whatever, but it was the weirdest thing. The wild. So I remember that one. I also remember when, I think it was with you, I'm pretty sure it was the Ben and Dave show, when they booked this guy who was like the quarterback's coach for the Green Bay Packers, who had, remember, he was on and he was from LA, but he was getting the head coaching job in Philadelphia. Do you remember this? I don't know if you remember this. Yes. Andy Reid came on before he got the Eagles job. And I remember we were having this conversation like, who the hell's Andy Reid? Andy Reid, like, come on, Andy Reid. We didn't really know who he was at the time. And now Andy Reid's one of the all-time winningest coaches in the NFL. He's a Hall of Famer. He's got a chance because he's coaching Patrick Mahomes to end up the all-time winningest coach in NFL history. And I remember that interview fondly, Dave, in retrospect, because we talked mostly about Tommy's Hamburgers and just like growing up in LA and what it was like for Andy Reid. We didn't really talk a lot of football with Andy, but he was great. And I had no idea that he would, obviously he didn't know who we were. We didn't know who he was. And he would go on and become this dominator as an NFL coach. So it was pretty cool.
I remember one time, it must have been about a year or so ago, maybe a little bit more. I used to drive back and forth, have this long drive from Culver City when I was working for another network. And I'm listening to you on the way home. I'm still laughing about it to this day. I think it was like your third drunk in a row that called you in the middle of the night. And then you're saying, oh, God, what am I doing? You know, my mother told me, you know, your brother's a lawyer, son. You've got to go to law school or become a doctor or something. You don't want to get into radio. And I didn't listen to her. And here I am, 3 o'clock in the morning, talking to drunks all night. Well, she was right. I should have listened.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man. You know, Dave, listen, I mean, you're in the same boat I'm in. We do caller-driven radio. And there's not a lot of people that do caller-driven radio anymore.
No.
Like the consultants, the way the radio business is now, it's usually a two-man show. And we did a two-man show, but we took calls. We had game shows. You know, we tried different bits.
Yes.
That was something about the Ben and Dave show. We always tried new things. We always were trying to be creative and come up with new shtick and all that stuff. But yeah, doing the overnight show, and I did the weekend overnight show for a long time before I became the weekday overnight guy at Fox. And it was ridiculous. I mean, it was one drunk after another. And you know, even now I go out, I do appearances. I'll give you a great story, Dave. So we're going to be in Vegas. You know, I don't know when this is going to air, but we'll be doing a Vegas appearance here later in the month of August. And we were in Vegas last August, and this guy shows up. Mike is his name, and he's from the Midwest. He lives in Vegas. He's this homeless guy. His name is Mouthwash Mike. He's a drunk who lives in Vegas. He lives on the streets, and he wants to take me at the remote. He's like, hey, let's go over to the Bellagio. He likes to swim in the fountains at the Bellagio in Vegas. That's what he likes. That's his fun. But he drinks mouthwash. He can't stop drinking mouthwash, Dave, because, you know, when you drink so much, unfortunately, you get to the point where your body can't live without alcohol. You know, so he's got that condition. Yeah, and so I mean that's just an example. I've done these meet and greets, like I said, around the country, and I met a lot of Ben and Dave fans, and also a lot of people that love alcohol. So love and I don't mind alcohol either. I'm not some kind of prude or something like that. But it's the guys that call in late at night, especially, and you're the same way I am, Dave. We both prepare. I over prepare. I always. I remember the first show I did not with you, Dave, but I did a show at AM 1150 when I was starting out, my first ever talk show. Remember Bo Bennett, our old boss,
our original program director. Yeah,
Bo Bennett, who hired me from San Diego, and Bo's like, hey, I'm going to give you your own show. It's going to be on Saturday morning. And so I spent all week preparing that opening monologue, and I was like so excited. You know, this is my big opportunity to do talk radio. And it was a Saturday morning, and I got in there, and I absolutely killed it. I just killed the monologue. I dominated. I gave out the number, and nobody called, and I had no material the rest of the show. And I was just sitting there drowning. And I said, I'm never going to have that happen again. I'm never going to be in that position again. I'm always going to be prepared where I can do the entire show, whether it's 4 or 5 hours. I'm always going to be prepared where I don't need a single phone call. And I know you approach things the same way, Dave, and I think that's one of the things that made the Ben and Dave show great. We were both overly prepared. We didn't probably get to 90% of the stuff that we planned to get to.
Most of the stuff I have written down, I never get to on a show.
Yeah, that means you're doing a good show. Absolutely. So you always got to be prepared and all that stuff. And I also remember some of the shtick that you would pull, and some of that I've stolen. I remember there was a Christmas. It was either Christmas Eve or Christmas morning. You remember this? We're doing a show. And we were both really groggy and out of it. And we didn't want to be there. And it was one of those days in radio where you're like, why am I here? What have I done? Like you said about me doing the overnight show with the drunks. We were both like, why? No one's listening. You know, it's Christmas, Eve or whatever. And you said on the air, I'm going to tell you how to get tickets to the Rose Bowl. But you can't. What was it said, Dave? You said you can't say it on the air or something like that.
Well, it was a challenge, and we're not going to get any calls. It's like it's New Year's morning or something. It was Christmas morning. And I said, if you want tickets to go see UCLA, Wisconsin in the Rose Bowl, call in today if you want tickets. That was the presentation. And then the board was lit up the entire show. Remember, Ben? And right at the end, they said, "Who won?" I said, "I don't know. I don't have them." I never said I had them. I just said, "If you want tickets."
I think you said something like call like Barry's tickets.
Yeah, call a ticket and call Barry's tickets.
Yeah, they got some.
What do you want from me? I don't have them.
People got so upset. It was hilarious. I remember one time we were giving something away. I think this was on the Ben and Dave show, And I would always dabble in hyperbole. I still dabble in hyperbole. And I made some throwaway comment like, you're going to win this, and I'll give you the world and all this. And some woman showed up and she was like demanding all this stuff that I had said she had won. I was like, I was just kidding. I was just embarrassed. Some people don't get the sarcasm, Dave. They don't understand. They just goes right over their head.
Yeah, you got that right. And you talk about being prepared and being over-prepared. You and I were the same way about that. And nowadays, though, Ben, you turn on a national network and there's somebody on there who doesn't know who Barry Sanders is.
I know. Wow, I saw that
the
clip.
Standards have dropped.
I know. It is wild. Well, one thing I've learned from being in the business as long as I've been in it, and you've been in it a long time, David, longer than I have, is a lot of those really good jobs, the top jobs, it's not how good you are, it's who you know. It's not the quality of the people. I've met people who do like low-level gigs that are much better than network people that I've come across, that I've met, that are more prepared. And I've worked with one of the biggest stars in sports media, who I will not name here for the purpose of trying to keep my gainful employment, who I witnessed being fed in his headphone. He knew nothing about baseball, and the producer would feed him questions and comments because he was completely uneducated on the sport of baseball. And this guy was one of the highest paid, is still one of the highest paid people in all of sports media, and it blows me away. But yeah, the clip you're referring to, the woman who did not know Barry Sanders, and it's like those are the kind of moves where you're like what is wrong with this?
I'm sitting here playing with my dingleberries out of work, and she doesn't know who Barry Sanders is.
I know it's it's a great life lesson. It's like I say, people that go to Harvard. You don't go to Harvard for the education. You go to Harvard because you can network with people and get those gigs. They always Harvard people hire Harvard people. Yes. Or, I went to Saddleback College, so I don't really have a lot of networking that I can push on and say, all right, I went here, you went here, so let's get a gig. Another fun story from the Ben and Dave show. Do you remember when TJ Simers? He was a football writer, and he hung up on us. Multiple times we'd have TJ on from San Diego, and he hung up on it. He became a big columnist at the LA Times, but I actually became pretty good friends with TJ. He passed away last year, and I when I saw him before he passed away, we were telling some stories about his call-ins to the Ben and Dave show, and he remembered. TJ remembered some of those appearances. Another one. Here's a great story. I think I can name this person. We were doing a show. The Super Bowl was in San Diego, and they had an event in Orange County. It was like a Super Bowl event, but it was in Orange County. If you remember, we had a tight end on, a Hall of Fame tight end on from the Denver Broncos, who would go on and have a big media career. Remember Shannon Sharp was on? Yeah,
Shannon Sharp.
If you remember, though, that Shannon Sharp, we kept asking him football questions. And do you remember what Shannon Sharp said? Shannon Sharp said, on the Ben and Dave show, I don't like football. I don't watch football. He just wanted to talk about some workout thing that he was promoting. And he totally blew us off. And then he ended up becoming a commentator on football on television. But maybe he was just saying that because he didn't want to do the interview. But he seemed pretty convincing that he did not watch any NFL games. He knew nothing about the NFL.
Oh, time now to pay some bills here, take a little bit of break, and hear from our great sponsor, MTS Transportations. Dave Smith Unleashed, brought to you by MTS Transportations. And mention the Dave Smith Unleashed podcast and get 20% off on your next shipment for all your shipping, trucking, and freight needs. There's only one business to call, and that's MTS Transportations at 800-640-6873. MTS Transportations, 800-640-6873. Ben Maller with us here on Dave Smith and Dave Smith Unleashed. One of the greatest things you ever did, I don't know if I should mention his name or not, but there was a guy, he was a pretty big name in sports talk radio at the time. So you told me this story. He's in his office, and an interview came in over the wire, an AP interview with Dan Marino. And so the whole thing was going on. So he went in there and he erased the AP guy's questions and put his own voice in like he was interviewing Marino. And he said, coming up on the show tonight, I have Dan Marino. And then you saw that, and then you went into the studio and erased his voice and put your voice in, like for a demo tape, like you were interviewing. So that's genius, like you were interviewing Dan Marino.
Yeah. So I was interning in San Diego at the Mighty 690, and then I got hired down there. And every week before they do these coaches, like the other team, the quarterback and the coach would meet with the other team's media. And so everything was recorded. And the person that I was working with, he would take the generic sound bites and make them seem like he was doing a one-on-one interview. And in this little studio in San Diego, he had everything on these things called carts, this old technology. Everything's digital now. And everything was on a cart, all the answers of Dan Marino. And there was a piece of paper that had all the questions to toss to Dan Marino. So I was like, what the F? I can interview Dan Marino. This is like the greatest, quarterback, Miami Dolphins, all this stuff. So sure enough, I made a demo tape of me interviewing Dan Marino, which you would not have known. You would have thought, like, wow, how did this kid get Dan Marino on? And I remember that. You also remember we got a cease and desist letter on the Ben and Dave show from the Angels. The then California Angels sent us a cease and desist letter. Do you remember the clip? It was from the Angels spring training. And I forget how we got our hands on this. The Angels had a broadcaster named Mario Impemba.
Yeah, he made a big mistake on the air, like curse word or something.
Yeah. So they started the Angel pregame show, and it was like, this is the California Angels radio network. And they listed all these sponsors. And then there was some other noise, and it was just a complete disaster. And Mario Impemba gets on there and says, oh, what a clusterfuck this is, right? And we got
playing that on the air, yes.
Yeah, I was bleep it, but we played it on the air, and we got in trouble. The people over at the Angels at the time, they were very upset. They got very angry. I would say the masterpiece, the Mona Lisa of the Ben and Dave show, and I think you'll agree, Dave, was when Channel 5, back when local TV mattered, and Channel 5 hired this woman named Claudia Treos to be the sports anchor, and God love Claudia. She was very bad at her job, And at that time, because there was no social media, like local television, local sports radio was a big deal. That's why we said that the impact the Ben and Dave show had was so important for people, because there wasn't this other stuff. And so even like local TV news, sports, you think, well, who cares about local TV news, sports? But at the time, it was a really big deal. And this woman was just, horrific. It was an experimental thing.
And she barely spoke English, and she was on an English. That was the problem.
Yeah, that was the main issue. Yeah. And then they hired joke writers. Remember? And I was friends with some people at Channel 5, and so we were getting fed. I was getting fed stuff from people, because they were upset. The people that worked at the TV station were like, "This is terrible." They had high standards. They had Stu Mahan, this legendary sportscaster back in the day, and Ed Arnold, these legends. And then they're like, what are we doing here? And so they would feed us stuff, and we would talk about it. And I would say the masterpiece on that was that while they were having a meeting, remember they were having a meeting at Channel 5 about Claudia Treos, like what to do with her. We were reporting in real time. People were sending me, they were in the breaks, they were calling. We didn't have really text messaging at that time. But they would call me and let me know what was going on. And so we were getting real-time information. And it was driving them nuts because they couldn't figure out how we were getting the information. But we had every nugget of information on that. And that was a fun one. I remember that. I think she went on. Last I heard, she married like a really, really wealthy guy. So I think things worked out for Claudia. I think she's doing really well.
She married, I don't know if she's still married. She married Rolando Arellano, who was a lawyer from Oxnard, and the boxer, the world champion boxer Fernando Vargas. He was his manager, and he managed fighters. She wound up marrying him. I don't know if they're still married or not.
Okay, I don't know for sure. I just heard from somebody. Her name came up years ago, and they said, yeah, she married some guy that has a lot of money, and they're in good shape, whatever. So I don't know if they're still together. I have no idea.
Well, tell us some. You talked about, how did you get started in the business? You're going to Saddleback College. I think you played football there. And how did did you study broadcast in college? Because almost everybody I've ever known in sports talk radio, Ben, None of us went to broadcast school. None of us studied broadcasting. None of us majored in it. We kind of fell into it by accident. So how did you get into radio?
Yeah, so I went to Saddleback College. They actually had a college radio station in Mission Viejo, which is halfway between like San Diego and LA. So they had a radio thing, but it was like a jazz station. And I just kind of fussed around. I wasn't much of a student, so I loved the idea of radio. I actually wanted to be a play-by-play guy. I wanted to replace Vin Scully. That was going to be my gig. I was going to be the Dodger play-by-play guy. Had that in my head. And I did fall into sports radio. I did not intend to do sports radio when I started. I thought I would be a play-by-play guy and work my way up. And then at one point I realized like all those guys doing play-by-play were really old people and they never left those jobs. They kept those jobs forever. So I was like, well, that's not going to work out. I'm not going to sit around here and wait 30 years of my life to get a play-by-play job. And then maybe be a minor league guy. And I remember we were doing the broadcast from the NBA Finals in 2000, the Pacers and the Lakers. We were in Indianapolis, and I met the play-by-play guy for the Indianapolis Indians AAA team, and that guy was, he was an old guy, and he had been there for like 25 years. I'm like, oh, I don't want to be that guy. But prior to that, I was at Saddleback. I don't study radio. I was an on-air jazz DJ. They let us do the play-by-play for the football team at Saddleback and the basketball team. And then I interned in San Diego. I went down to the Mighty 690, and that was when Steve Hartman and Chet Forty were still doing the show. The guy that was the Monday Night Football producer, the Loose Cannons. I interned on Hacksaw. Jim Rome had starting to become a star. Jim Rome had just gotten his ESPN2 show, where I was actually down there the day after Jim got into it with Jim Everett. Remember the famous,
yeah.
You're not going to call me Chris, and then the table got flipped over and all that. So I was interning down there, and then I got a job as a stringer because they knew I lived in Orange County and I was working in San Diego. And so they said, well, with the Mighty 690, we cover all of LA and Orange County. And so I became the reporter, and I did briefly have a job as a board op. I was the board op for San Diego State basketball, which I was terrible at. I'm a horrific engineer. But then I ended up covering games, and I made so many contacts. I was at every night. I was at a Dodger game or an Angel game or Lakers or Clippers or Kings, and then I remember when the company bought. They merged. The company in San Diego merged, and they got the station in LA, and they're like, hey, we want you to move to the LA station. And so then I started doing that, and the rest is history. We would be remiss though if we do not mention on the Ben and Dave show reunion on your podcast, Dave Smith, the great Mark Smith.
Oh, he loved him.
Peace. Mark Smith,
what a character!
This guy, you talk about throwback, just a wonderful human being. And there was always a bit of mystery about Mark Smith.
Yes.
And he was the toughest mofo around. And if we would do a bad segment, you remember, Dave, not every one of the Ben and Dave segments was good. And if we did stuff that Mark Smith did not like, I remember one time he'd come in and he'd like punch you in the arm.
I remember he came charging into the studio one time. You did something that ticked him off, and I announced it like I was a boxing announcer. I said, Mark Smith's in the studio. Lance left, Lance right. Maller's down. Maller's down.
That was a very large man. And Mark Smith had the biggest fist. He was a pretty big guy himself.
Even if he tapped you with his fist, it hurt so much. He hit so hard, Mark.
Yeah.
Oh.
And God bless him. He had terrible vision. I remember at the end of the Ben and Dave show, there were nights we'd all kind of leave together. And remember, me and you would be like, all right, let's let Mark leave ahead of us. We don't want to be in front of Mark. You remember? Because he couldn't see. We were worried he was going to hit you.
And it was on his driver's license. He wasn't allowed to drive at night, but he did anyway.
Yeah, he drove every night. He drove at night. And he also may or may not have had some kind of protection in the car. I remember hearing that story.
He did. Yeah, he was carrying.
Yeah, he was carrying. So you have a guy that can't see, that shouldn't be driving at night, that has a firearm under the seat of his car. What could go wrong, right? What could go wrong, Dave?
I remember I was driving to work one night, those studios in Burbank where we used to work, and I pulled up next to him at a red light, like about a half hour before the show. He was coming to work at the same time as me, and I honked the horn. I said, "Hey, Mark," and he turned around, and he had like a magnifying glass on top of his glasses, and he was trying to figure out who it was, and then he didn't know it was me. And he said, "F y'all, MF, I'll come here and F you up." And he was screaming. I said, "Mark, it's me." He said, "F y'all." And he was driving a car. That's how bad his vision was.
Oh, he could not see. I mean, everything. You'd look across the glass, and Mark would be leaning over trying to read the carts with the monocle or whatever he had on his glass. I don't know, the magnifying glass. I mean, he was great. It was a big part of it. And I mean, you said you had Vassay on, who was part of that, you know, kind of back in the day as one of the producers there. We had Guillermo was with us for a while, and
Tim Cates, who's on the part of the Dodger broadcast now.
That's right. I remember Tim Cates as an intern. And worked his way up and all that stuff. So, and the great conversations we had with Rick Dees, who was the biggest star in LA radio, one of the nicest people you could possibly imagine, just cool, down to earth. And every once in a while we were doing the midday show, and Rick would be recording his top 40 show. And then he'd also tape the first hour of his morning show for the next day. And every once in a while, Rick would walk into the studio, the Ben and Dave studio, and throw some pearls of wisdom at us.
Oh, fantastic part 2 with Ben. Hey, Ben, can you do some more? I'm enjoying this.
Yeah, we'll come back. We'll do it again. Why not?
How much more time? Okay, good. So that's it for the Dave Smith and the Dave Smith Unleashed podcast. We're going to be doing a part 3 with Ben Madler coming up. And man, we could probably do 9, 10, 11 parts talking about the great old days at AM 1150. So everybody, make sure to subscribe and like and to comment on the YouTube channel, The Dave Smith Unleashed. And we'll talk to you next time right here with Dave Smith.